Previously on Dallas.
I love her. I want both of them. Her and the baby.
What happened was as much your fault as ours, and we've been doing all the paying, up to now. We're gonna see to it you're real sorry for this, JR.
You know, Grandma, I don't think Sue Ellen wants to see the baby.
All I care about is that you start acting like a wife and a mother. Baby's missing. He's been kidnapped.
We get a sense of just how important the Ewings are to Dallas as the hospital descends into an O.J. Simpson trial circus-like atmosphere. And the cops call for a hard target search of every gas station, residence, warehouse, farmhouse, henhouse, outhouse, and doghouse in the 6-mile radius. Sue Ellen, still mired in grief and shame, blames herself in front of the detective. A protective JR intervenes before she either implicates herself or spills everything about her and Cliff Barnes, and the detective tells JR not to try to handle it himself, a lesson unlearned from the last time a Ewing was kidnapped. As much of a bastard as JR has been so far, the first 2 episodes of this season have picked up where Season 2 left off, with the kinder, gentler JR taking his parents' advice to heart and becoming the best darn husband he can be. Of course, he's a hollow half person by now, so his capacity to love is measured in dividends and mean glares. But he's trying.
Well, that's something anyway.
We get a montage of all the Ewings being brought up to speed on the kidnapping. The FBI arrives on the scene, and they actually do mention the time that Bobby was kidnapped and how everything all worked out right. I mean, it ended in a shootout with Bobby and Cliff getting caught in the crossfire, but I guess this is an area where you say, "But did you die?" and then you move on. Speaking of going into business for yourself, Bobby runs into Pamela and tells her that he's going to confront her dastardly kidnapper of a brother. Pamela tells him not to jump to conclusions, but he's too filled with vim and vigor to listen. Yeah, I'm glad we eventually got Bobby's brand of level-headed deliberation in the state senate. They do a half gag where the Ewings are tensely gathered around the phone waiting for the kidnappers to call, only to have Muriel call for Lucy and Marilee Stone call for Sue Ellen. We are also introduced to Baby John's nurse, Mrs. Reeves, who is so inappropriately helpful and nosy that she might as well be named Mrs. Red Herring. A drugged-up Sue Ellen continues to think that she's being punished for her infidelity and drinking, but she shakes it off and wanders into the baby's room for a soliloquy about how she's sick of being used by men, and she's not going to allow herself to be hurt anymore, even by Baby John. This is a brief but powerful scene, and as shocking as it is to hear Sue Ellen being defensive against a 1-week-old, it makes perfect sense in the story. Jock and JR have treated her like a broodmare for the last 8 years, and everyone has been looking past her to what the baby means for the family. Even when Ellie tried to offer some motherly advice to Sue Ellen, that advice was, make your marriage better with a baby.
If a child can help your marriage, then you do what you have to do.
It would be impossible for Sue Ellen not to associate Baby John with the mountains of abuse that have been heaped on her. Abuse that's only been exacerbated since she got pregnant.
Nobody's gonna hurt me anymore. Not even you.
Jock receives a call from an anonymous woman who says that she returned the baby to City Hall because she felt guilty. But it turns out to be a wild goose chase. A less goosey lead occurs when JR receives a call from Jeb Ames, offering to get the baby back for a cool $1 million. Bobby storms into Cliff's office and terrorizes his secretary. Cliff, meanwhile, returns from Austin and receives a warning from Pam to let Bobby cool off. No chance of that because Bobby comes into the apartment ready for fisticuffs. It's important to note here that as far as everyone knows, Cliff is Baby John's father, so Bobby is really filled with righteous anger about a man taking his own son from the hospital. This whole segment of the show with Bobby on the warpath is simultaneously sexist and classist. Classist because Bobby just assumes the Ewings own Baby John and Cliff, the baby's biological father, has stolen him. And sexist in that they don't even treat Cliff as if he has any rights as a father. A baby is the mother's responsibility and the father just helps out, if she lets him. This mindset is pretty messed up, actually. Of course, when questions about the baby's paternity are later answered, it all becomes moot, but none of the characters knew that at the time. Spoiler alert from 1979. The Ewing women learn that the call was a hoax, but Sue Ellen's only reaction is to ask for another cup of coffee, creeping out Ellie and Lucy. JR scrapes some cash together to pay off Jeb, and of course Von Leland, their banker, is very concerned about what happens to the money.
It's a lot of money.
It's my son's life.
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad he got swindled later on. Bobby and Cliff do the old pro wrestling, let's set aside our differences long enough to defeat the megabucks routine. Bobby turns his nice guy threatening powers on the hospital administrators so that they can go through the paperwork. It's wild to think about, but at this point there was no federal law against sharing of information if the hospital administrator thought it was relevant. So if there were a compelling enough state interest, you could just walk in and get Marilee Stone's pap smear results. Frustrated by the lack of information, Pamela wanders over to the neonatal unit to look at the babies and is reminded of a woman who came in every day to visit. She's so excited that she runs back over to tell Bobby, Cliff, and the boom mic operator. The Scoobies get the lady's name and head over to talk to her. Priscilla is polite but not particularly helpful until Pamela hears a baby crying in the next room. Since the hospital told Pamela that Priscilla's baby died, Pam knows something is up. Cliff checks the name tag, which Priscilla conveniently didn't get rid of, and confirms that it's baby John. It turns out Priscilla had a bout of psychosis when her baby died, and she simply took baby John to help cement the illusion that her baby survived. It's all rather tragic. The revelation comes just in time for JR to snatch that $1 million out of Jeb's clutches and tell him to get the hell out. Priscilla tearfully returns baby John, but Sue Ellen seems ambivalent about the whole thing. Yikes. This opening two-parter does satisfactorily wrap up the threads left open by the Season 2 cliffhanger, and I appreciate how the resolution to the kidnapping angle stayed on theme. I've stated repeatedly that good long-term drama will explore the themes from multiple angles so that the audience feels an inner tension as they watch. It's the friction of identifying with Sue Ellen, a woman whose connection with her baby has shut off because she associates him with trauma, with Pamela, a woman who desperately wants a child but circumstances leave her childless, and Priscilla, a woman who tries to mask her trauma by taking someone else's baby. We empathize with all three women for different reasons, and while we don't have to condone their actions, our understanding is what compels us to watch, to feel, and maybe, hopefully, to think about the plights of these women and women like them. It's why fictional narratives are so powerful. The other thread, of course, is JR's attempt to become a good husband. Don't worry, it only lasts a few episodes of sympathetic John Ross isn't your bag. But it does reveal an interesting piece of his character that we'll have to circle back around and talk about in the Kristen affair. My only gripe about the episode is that it feels a little overlong, with the Ewings hanging out by the phone, and the hoax that sends Jock to City Hall for a few scenes is obvious filler. I try not to Monday morning quarterback the writers too much, but it would have been interesting if the last episode of the previous season ended with the kidnapping, and the whole thing was resolved in the season opener. That might have tightened things up a bit. But a combined 32 million people tuned in for these episodes, so they probably don't need my Gene and Roger at this point. But the bottom line is the Ewings are back, Lil Jon is home. Yeah! And I'm sure things are going to go well for JR this season.